Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lavanya, your MC for this conference. And on behalf of my colleagues at CoRE, I would like to warmly welcome you to the 2022 Duke-NUS CoRE Scientific Conference on Patients as Partners for Health, Co-Creating Equitable Access to Health Products and Services. We are very pleased to welcome our guest of honor, Dr. Janil Puducherry, Senior Minister of State for Ministry of Communications and Information and Ministry of Health, Singapore. Also gracing the conference today are our Scientific Conference Committee members who have contributed a multitude of knowledge and insights on the topic of patient engagement. Not forgetting our Advisory Board members who are here with us for their never-ending support with us towards CoRE's vision and mission. Warm greetings to our valued sponsors who have made this event possible for being our supporting partners for this year's Scientific Conference. And most importantly, we are very pleased to welcome our attendees who bring a wide range of experiences and perspectives, all with a common interest and purpose as us. The conference has lined up a series of interesting and insightful sessions with renowned global and regional leaders. Through learning from these experts on patient centricity in healthcare systems, this conference aims to discuss trends, global practices, and address key challenges in areas of patient engagement for health products, access equity, and sustainable health systems. You can learn more about the program and exciting topics that will be covered during the CoRE Scientific Conference by downloading the brochure. To ensure an interactive experience, the session chair will host a panel discussion upon the completion of the speakers' presentations. You're welcome to pose your questions to the speakers via poll everywhere, provided as shown on the screen. We hope this will ensure a fruitful time of sharing and learning over the next 2 days.
Now, the theme of this year's conference is Patients as Partners for Health, Co-Creating Equitable Access to Health Products and Services. Now, that builds on two earlier CoRE conferences on patient engagement in 2018 and 2019, and as I said, it's a return to face-to-face workshops. It's also great that we have active participation from a range of partners and parties that are absolutely critical to solid and strong patient engagement. That's both in speakers and the audience, and of course I'd encourage you to actively participate throughout. If the theme is about participation, we, the participants in this meeting, whether we're virtual or in person, need to echo that and actively participate. And that's from industry, from regulators, HTA and government, but most importantly, patient groups. And I'd also like, in particular, to thank the Vice Chair of the Organising Committee, Dr. Leonard Rago, and also others on the Conference Organising Committee. It's a sense of a long journey that started about a year ago, I think, since we first looked at organising this conference, and I feel that we have arrived at our destination, and I think our destination should live up to expectations. Now, so often we say, well, of course, patient engagement in regulation, product development, HTA is a good thing, but I think it's important for us throughout the next 2 days to challenge the rationale for patient engagement. Now, what is the case? It's obvious to many of us, but it's important for us to think about the rationale in order to make sure it achieves its most important objectives. It's important that our advocacy for patient engagement with our peers, and I do have to often convince others in government and in regulators about the importance of a patient voice. So we mustn't assume it as a given. Because we're here at this conference, we obviously are believers in patient engagement. But don't go away assuming that others in our organisations or others we talk to see it as a critical part of the process. We have to make a clear case to our peers, our organisations, our governments and industry. Now, the main case to me is for patient engagement, is that patients have daily lived experience of the particular condition or the therapies and of the services they receive for that condition. And that can be health services or health products. The major focus of this discussion is health products, but there is a continuum between health products and health services. If you, for example, have a cardiac stent inserted, it's as much about the services around that small medical device than it is about the device itself. And so the patients who have daily lived experience of a particular condition are the experts in their lived condition or illness. We can learn at university, whether we're in a particular medical specialty or whether we're trained in physiology, pharmacology, or anatomy, about the science and medicine behind that condition. But that's no substitute for the lived experience, especially the chronic condition where people may have 20, 30, 40 years of lived experience. It's no substitute for that. Now, there's also a strong case for involving patients and consumers in the development of health products and services from a human rights and an economic point of view. And of course, many patients are like the rest of our community. Sometimes we have this mental model where we see patients as those people who might be in their pajamas in a hospital bed, but that's only at a particular time in some of a patient cycle. Patients are us. And of course, it means that patients have a range of other skills: leadership, innovation, entrepreneurship, communication skills. And so that's number 4 in the 4 areas of lived experience, I guess, justice, equity, and of course, leadership and innovation. So they can be a very valuable resource for the health system. Now, patient engagement is both easier and more challenging than it has been in the past. We all have access to Dr. Google, and Dr. Google is both a force for good and a force for bad. My colleagues who see patients daily say that it's very rare, and yes, I live in a university and government town where people are highly connected. It's very rare for a patient to turn up even to their family physician, their general practitioner, without they've already done the diagnosis of themselves. They may turn up and say, oh, look, I've obviously got endometrial cancer because I Googled it, and that's why I've got a pain in my abdomen. So the access to information through the internet and through support networks is a plus for people to become more health literate, but it can be a disadvantage. But we can't get rid of Dr. Google. It is natural human curiosity and also a sense of urgency, sometimes a sense of comfort, but also sometimes a sense of concern that people use the internet so much for diagnosis and putative treatment. But it does underline the fact that we've moved from my parents' generation, where the doctor was a person in a white coat who knew everything and you quietly listened to what they told you, to having a top-down approach and even a shared approach about particular options for treatment, particular care options, and also more personalised recommendations. So the paradigm has shifted. And that's the 5th reason why patient involvement is so important in health products and services. The final reason is involving patients and caregivers from the very early planning stage, whether it's clinical trials or whether it's design of products and services, can actually help researchers design medicines, medical devices, and services that meet the needs of patients. And that continued engagement is important after a product has been approved, especially to support effective communication around the safe use of product. Every product involves both benefits and risks and uncertainty. There's really 3 limbs. And indeed, there's benefit, risks, and uncertainty analyses in any health service that you have as well. So the next question, having built the case for patient engagement, is how to accelerate it in Asia Pacific. Now, much has been done elsewhere in the world, Asia, North America, and Australia, and it's fantastic to see both in-person experts, and we have some of the world's leading experts. We've been very fortunate to attract them. So much has been done in those areas, but in this part of the world, efforts to engage civil society and people living with diseases and conditions in health products and development in the access and delivery of health services has been much more limited. And there's a number of reasons that can be assessed. Now, we'll explore the reasons why during this conference. Some of the reasons are cultural. Perhaps the transition from doctor knows all to engaging in a discussion as an equal partner in your care has been slower to move in some societies in this part of the world than it has been in Europe, North America, or Australia. Perhaps also we need to consider resources. It's no good taking a highly resource-intensive patient model, engagement model, and applying it to Cambodia or Laos, for example. The resources are just not there. Being able to see a healthcare professional is indeed something that many in the poorer countries of Asia Pacific do not have the ability to do. However, we need to look at models that are fit for purpose for a range of different cultural and economic conditions, from low and middle income countries to well-resourced, highly sophisticated leading countries in Asia, such as Singapore. No matter where we live or work, people living with health conditions have a right to no longer be seen as passive beneficiaries, but should be equal partners and leaders in the decision-making process. Now, just to finish, I wanted to talk through the logic of the program, because it is designed as a bit of a thought process journey, and the organising committee, which has worked on this over the last 12 months, structured the program deliberately. Now, let's see if it works. We may have got it wrong. So the focus of the conference is on strengthening the role of patient engagement, particularly in health products, but also there's a necessary link to service delivery. And this also reflects the evolution of CoRE as a Centre for Regulatory Excellence. There's a recognition that products and services are closely linked, and we felt that it was appropriate to focus mainly on health products, at least at this stage, both of CoRE's evolution and of the evolution around patient engagement. It also recognises that either the prescription of a medicine, or if you're as an outpatient, or if you're attending a hospital, quite often the insertion or use of a medical device, even if it's not an implantable medical device, it's very rare to have a hospital visit without encountering a medical device, and indeed a medicine. But it's the most common outcome of a doctor's consultation or from hospital or day surgery admission. And so the sequence of the presentations today, if you look at the program, was designed to follow the sequence of drug and medical device development. So the plenary builds the case. Then we move, and has several eminent speakers. Then we move in session 1 to preclinical and clinical development, and looks at the role of patients in determining which conditions and drugs should be prioritised and which endpoints are important. Session 2, benefit and risk assessment, the regulatory process. Session 3 looks at the increasing emphasis on looking at cost effectiveness and other parameters in health technology assessment. Health technology assessment is evolving and expanding in Asia. And while it has various forms, depending on the state of economic development and the role of government in the health system, it is evolving and expanding in Asia Pacific. Session 4 focuses on the role of patients and patient engagement in safety and healthcare delivery. We found that absolutely critical during the COVID pandemic, where it was really important to work with patient groups to communicate the fact that COVID vaccines had been extensively tested, and the benefits overwhelmingly exceeded the risks. Without patient engagement, the levels of vaccination achieved in many countries would not have been anywhere near the levels they are. And indeed, patient engagement will be important to continue with health measures and also with vaccine uptake. Day 2, so day 1 is really what? Taking you through the various steps of development and HTA and post-market, as we regulators call it. Day 2 is really focused about the how of patient engagement. So it starts with a plenary on putting the patient at the forefront of patient engagement. Then it looks at strengthening the culture in this region of patient engagement and health systems. Then it talks about the how of using patient-reported outcomes or patient-generated health data, as it's known variously, and real-world evidence. Because again, patients sit on a goldmine of evidence and data. Then it focuses on development priorities for patient engagement in Asia Pacific. And the final formal session, session 8, looks at the use and development of multi-stakeholder programs to progress patient engagement. And then we don't want to just come to the end of a conference and feel good about it. We want people to feel good, by the way, but we want you to do more than feel good. We want to develop a draft consensus step. Now, that essentially is the immediate and initial output of this conference. It's agreed between the participants for the next 2 days, or this period, and it can provide a tangible way forward. We want it to be a roadmap that can be used when we go back home to look at whether it's to facilitate our discussions with government, to facilitate our discussions with industry, and to help build momentum in patient organisations. And the principles and strategies that will be aligned in the statement that will come out of the discussions over the next 2 days will suggest that there's a range of actions that stakeholder groups can take to support the meaningful engagement of patients and caregivers. But it's also going to be focused on what is realistic and practical for the Asian Pacific region. And if we can commit to following progress on the statement and sharing our experiences, then we can ensure it's sustainable. So, in closing, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have a very exciting couple of days ahead. And with that, I welcome you to the conference.
We would now like to invite Dr. Lembit Rago, the Vice Chair of the Scientific Committee, to share his welcome remarks. Dr. Rago is Secretary General at the Council International Organizations of Medical Sciences, CIOMS, in Switzerland. Under his leadership, CIOMS has been very active in issuing international guidance documents in pharmacovigilance, product development, and research ethics. Prior to this, Dr. Rago was part of the WHO team, where he led to work to strengthen regulatory systems, including combating falsified medicines and the development of pharmacovigilance and regulatory networks in low and middle income countries. It's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Rago.
Very good morning to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I think as Professor John Skerritt did already a very extensive introduction, I can be much more shorter. And what I would like to say is that, of course, we are always on a journey. And this is also what concerns the patient engagement. I think historically, the patient engagement started from the more high-level involvement, less specific, and probably a bit more close to the general consumer attitudes and involvement in healthcare. Nowadays, it has been a long journey, and we have seen that the patient engagement has started to be more specific, going into the very specific areas of the product development. And you could say the patient engagement has been increasing in scope and nowadays covers the whole life cycle of a medical product. And as they cover the whole life cycle of medical product, we could say, if we are talking about the health services nowadays, of course, increasingly there are very few health services which can do without any health products. So this means that through the involvement in health products, there is additional involvement in health services. And this type of going to the more specific is quite symptomatic in many jurisdictions today, because let's say if we take the pandemic and if we take the clinical trials, now if we look at the patient engagement in clinical trials, formerly it was very paternalistic, so to say, view, and patients were not so much engaged. But nowadays many people say engaging patients is saving resources and having sometimes more meaningful results. Why? Because if you engage patients, you can have less dropouts. And second, you can have also sometimes more realistic study design, because sometimes scientifically the study design can be fantastic, but in real life conditions to carry it on is almost impossible, and you have very small recruitment numbers, you don't end up in anywhere. And then if we go to the comprehensive approach, then this life cycle approach, if we look, yes, nowadays also patients are consulted sometimes in the very, very early stages of the product development. And then if you look post-marketing, if you go to the post-marketing, the patient involvement continues, because you have nowadays also patients very prominent role in the safety, pharmacovigilance. You have also a patient's role in risk minimization, and you have also increasingly patients' engagement in health technology assessment, and you have also patient engagement in if you are going to the directly medical practice, if we're talking about the treatment guidelines. Now, in many jurisdictions, it's more starting to be a routine that when you are discussing the treatment guidelines, you have one another form of the patient engagement as well. So we have moved from the very general, high-level input from patients to the more specific and more comprehensive. Of course, we are in the journey, and different parts in the world are in different stages of the journey in terms of comprehensivity and in terms of specificity of patient engagement. Now, having said that, I am extremely happy that this meeting takes place here. It's not the first time in the region the patient engagement has been discussed. But I think it is now time to go to the next level. And as Professor Skerritt said, it's also very pragmatic that in the end of the day, we have some output of this conference, and we have some take-home messages, and we can develop further to make the patient engagement more meaningful and mature. And finalizing my little intervention, I would say I have also a little present to the guest of honor, Dr. Janil. And this is the SIOMS booklet, because SIOMS had an international working group, which was having the result coming just out. It was launched on 6th of September, patient involvement in the development, regulation, and safe use of medicines. So it's the consensus document from the International Working Group trying to promote this life cycle approach, that the patients are important partners and experts during the whole life cycle of medicines. So I wish to the conference all the success. I wish also that those participants who are participating from distance could make their voice heard and could intervene and try to contribute, because it's always a bit a challenge to have a hybrid meeting. But what is challenge after the COVID, what we have all survived. So we will survive this challenge as well. So all the success to the conference, all the best, be active, try to ask questions, try to irritate speakers. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raghu. To commence today's program, let's put our hands together to give a warm welcome to our guest of honor, Dr. Janil Puducherry, to deliver his opening address. Dr. Puducherry concurrently holds the appointment of Senior Minister of State in the Ministry of Communications and Information and Ministry of Health, Singapore. He previously held appointments as Senior Minister of State in the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Transport. Prior to politics, he was a senior consultant pediatric intensivist and department head for pediatric specialties in the KK Women's and Children's Hospital. And he was also an associate professor at Duke-NUS Medical School. Dr. Puducherry, please.
You know, as a pediatrician, you don't have to convince me about patient engagement. You don't engage the patient, you get nothing done. And like every other medical specialty, we think we do patient engagement better than everybody else. But thank you for inviting me here, everybody. Good morning, everybody. And thank you for inviting me to join you for the Duke-NUS Center of Regulatory Excellence 2022 Scientific Conference on the theme of patients as partners for health, co-creating equitable access to health products and services. Especially a warm welcome to our delegates and speakers from around the world and those that have traveled to Singapore for the conference. We appreciate your very strong commitment to patient engagement in person. Today's program is a comprehensive one. It includes an open dialogue on centering patients and caregivers in our healthcare system. And these healthcare services and products are ultimately developed to benefit patient care. Understanding the needs of consumers, which include both the patients and their caregivers, can help better design solutions, achieve the desired outcomes of health and safety. These consumers can also help to identify what are acceptable risks when new medicinal products, medications, vaccines are developed and introduced. Acceptable risks from the perspective of society, from the patient. Patient engagement is also important to raise consumer awareness and empowerment so that the patients and the public stay away from unsafe services and products. And we hope that they will then engage in the process of reporting the products and services to our authorities to better safeguard the safety of society. So it's important, it's critical, not just for individual clinicians, but for governments and regulators to engage patients and consumers when developing and reviewing healthcare and regulatory policies, not just the products and services. I thought in the next few minutes I might give you a sense of how we are doing and thinking and developing these ideas here in Singapore. The level of government, the work of some of our regulators, as well as some of our clinical teams. We've been doing this on many fronts. One example is the Agency for Care Effectiveness, ACE, was established in 2015 by the Ministry of Health to support providers, patients, and the payers of our system in making better informed decisions about healthcare. In 2021, ACE launched a new consumer engagement and education work stream to support patient involvement in health technology assessment and to develop educational resources to enhance the consumer understanding of health conditions. Together with global experts, healthcare professionals, scientific advisory bodies, ACE established a consumer panel, experts from patient and volunteer organizations. And just this year, launched a new initiative for members from local patient and voluntary organizations to share their lived experiences together with the technical evaluations. And these will have helped to inform our Drug Advisory Committee in developing recommendations and funding decisions for health technologies. These have been well received by our local patient organizations. These are experiences that they perhaps had not had before, but have now been well received. And that is a useful lesson to us, that they find these a meaningful, important activity in their role as patient advocates within their patient groups. In recent years, we've talked about Dr. Google, the free flow of health information online, as well as new modalities of care have led to an increasing sense of consumerism within healthcare. And for us, within the Ministry of Health, we've addressed part of this by engaging in a series of consumer education campaigns. We're hoping to educate the public, help them discern as consumers about the engagement with unlicensed healthcare professionals, unsafe products and services. As part of this is also an opportunity to educate the public on how to make smart decisions regarding new and emerging healthcare services. This includes the online purchase of direct-to-consumer genetic test kits, online sales of eyewear, other unlicensed healthcare services such as injections offered by unlicensed persons. This has been again well received by the public. We've seen a significant increase in traffic to websites and resources that provide these types of endorsed, curated educational assets. The Health Sciences Authority, the regulator, also regularly educates consumers, again with the same intent, raising the awareness of health product safety. But they take a slightly different approach in the sense of being responsive to public sentiment, especially if there are public sentiments about unsafe products, unsafe services, if there's a recent health scare or a recent product scare. And so, for example, a 6-week campaign recently to educate consumers on the dangers of buying health products where you have no way of verifying the source of purchase. They also collaborate with other agencies to take a targeted approach towards specific patient groups. So in the first section, I talked about what the Ministry of Health might be doing at a national level, and HSA then is now taking a responsive approach on the basis of what is causing anxiety, what is causing concern from the professionals, and also targeting specific at-risk groups, such as foreign domestic workers, migrant workers, students. There's also collaboration and cooperation on an international basis. The annual Med Safety Week campaign organized by the Uppsala Monitoring Conference, a global social media campaign where regulators simultaneously share campaign materials on their social media channels. Why is this important for us here in Singapore? Because so many of our, such a large proportion of our population are online and connected to getting their information, not within our geographical boundaries, but consuming information from around the world. We have to then raise our public's awareness on the recognition of unsafe products, unsafe practices, and engage them on the reporting of adverse effects or concerns about where their products are coming from. At the level of the public healthcare cluster, the ecosystem of hospitals and professional services that we've organized our service delivery around, there are also efforts to enhance patient access, patient experiences of healthcare services. SingHealth as the patient advocacy network established in March 2017, together with SingHealth Duke-NUS Institute for Patient Safety and Quality, self-driven by patients and caregivers. SingHealth, self-driven network of patients and caregivers, representing a collective voice of patients within the SingHealth cluster and involving them in the design of their services. Tan Tock Seng Hospital organizes their Singapore Patient Conference, a dedicated event, patients, caregivers, volunteers, community partners, as well as the health and social care professionals, talking about care journeys, brainstorming new ideas. National University Health System uses focus groups for patients, caregivers, partners, after they've been cared for at the NUHS institutions. And these approaches are not just these events and these engagements, they have a very real impact. The new Alexandra Hospital campus development it'll be a physical manifestation on the extent to which patients and caregivers have been engaged and participating in the development of this new campus. The perspectives, the lived experience, the care journeys that our patients go on. Public engagement is also a function of government. And I think for many of us, we saw this as a very live, lived experience in COVID-19. We've spent a lot of time talking about our communications, communicating about our communications, the extent to which we had to engage with our society as a way of assuring them about what we were doing with COVID-19, assuring us as a whole that we're in this together, that our measures work, compliance is useful for us, not just as individuals, but for benefit of our family, for society as a whole. So I think if we looked at the strategies that we deployed in COVID-19 and which were essential to enabling what we did in communication, especially healthcare communication, public health communication, was certainly vital, and we learned a lot of lessons as we went along. We wanted to keep our public well informed. We knew we had to keep everybody up to date, not just national policies that we were developing, but what was the scientific consensus on COVID-19? That was something that our public needed to know. These were things being done on the basis of scientific evidence that required not just explaining the policies, but explaining the scientific evidence as well. We saw people take advantage of the pandemic. Lots of health products or pseudo health products developed, launched, made available. And so we needed to put out regulatory information, advisories on the safe use on HSA's website, on engage consumers in adverse event reporting so that we could respond quickly as regulators to things that were being made available within our market. And this included vaccine events and vaccine adverse events, that we engaged the public and created channels for members of the public to then report vaccine-related adverse events, giving us mechanisms to sense early in case these new products, licensed as they were, regulated as they were, but now being deployed in our population, if they caused any issue, we needed to know early, and we engaged members of public in developing the processes to do that. And we have to close the loop in order then to shore up trust. Yeah, I think this is a time when I should speak to the SMS in charge of GovTech and Smart Nation about some of our telecommunications technology. These are one of the other hats that I wear. We have to close the loop with our public. We have to take the information from these safety signals detected from our COVID-19 vaccine reporting, the adverse events, the various products out there, and publish regular safety updates about this information that we're receiving from these channels, so that the public knows about how the channels are working, what actions that we're taking, how it informs our policy development. Something else that changed in COVID-19 was the development and uptake of telemedicine, relatively new service to many Singaporeans. And that required patient engagement, patient awareness. How do you use a telemedicine service provider properly? How do you fit this into the rest of your care journey? And as healthcare professionals, how do you provide telemedicine services properly and adequately in the overall care journey? There was a concerted effort because from a public health perspective, having an increasing number of services delivered through telemedicine had its advantages, but we had to educate the public in order to take full advantage of this opportunity. Both the advantages as well as the limitations of telemedicine. And so we had to get that right balance of when you turned up in person in clinic. Yesterday and today, we are debating in Parliament the white paper on our Healthier SG strategy. So now turning our attention to the future of healthcare in Singapore. In our white paper, we've outlined our interest, our strategy, our approach towards preventive population health. Built into this is the assumption that we will empower individuals to choose health for themselves, that shift in patient behavior is ultimately what we're trying to achieve. That engagement of individuals in taking ownership for their own health long before they feel the effects of illness or potential illness. We will help them working with family doctors, family physicians to engage individuals, and also bring along community partners such as our People's Association, the Health Promotion Board, Sport Singapore, in supporting them in engaging in these positive lifestyle changes. The paper currently being debated in Parliament, if passed, will have policies that are launched in 2023. In the process of developing this, we engaged over 6,000 members of the public, as well as healthcare professionals, in preparing for the white paper, the policies, and the debate. One of the key pieces of feedback that we received was the extent of choice versus coercion in engaging with this new shift towards preventative population health. The members of the public were very clear that they don't want to be forced. The intrinsic motivation was going to be more powerful, and they needed a framework, some nudges, some help to do the right thing, but to maintain that opportunity to choose their healthcare provider, choose their care journey, choose the interventions, and ultimately, we hope, choose health. So they wanted the choice, but they wanted to have support to improve their health and nudge them along at their own pace, and working together with their doctors, the family, and community partners. Getting that balance right was very much part of the engagement and very much part of our strategy. And I'm not sure that we have settled all the details of that. It's one thing to talk about it as a theory, as you go out and engage public, would you like this 2, 3, 5 years from now? Once we start rolling out the programs, getting that balance right from the nudges and the patient choice is going to be a core part of how we get the operations of Healthier SG correct, supporting the drive towards a healthier lifestyle. The regulators that are involved, we face many, many challenges. Regulatory resources, the emergence of new service models, advancements in science, including disruptive technologies. We talked about telemedicine, artificial intelligence, many other things. We have to ensure that we are better at audit and surveillance over this emerging healthcare technology and scientific landscape in order to ensure our citizens receive good quality care. One of the ways we're going to try and address that in Singapore is by introducing the Health Information Bill in 2023. And this will address issues of data privacy, data sharing, as well as some of the healthcare data standards within our healthcare ecosystem. And we hope then to drive a better care continuity within our ecosystem, facilitating proactive data sharing between healthcare providers with robust protections. We're already in the midst of engaging stakeholders on the key policies under this bill. We will seek further feedback from the public later this year. And like what we have talked about so far, this will help us to refine the key policies, the key regulatory processes under our Health Information Bill. I've talked a lot about what Singapore has done, but clearly we're never satisfied. It becomes a sort of a national trait of never to be satisfied with where we are. We want to do more, and clearly there are things that we can do better. There is more to be done. There's an increasing emphasis on the importance of real-world data for a product life cycle approach in assessing the effectiveness and safety of health products. There's a need to consider what we do with electronic health records, the link towards insurance claims, billing records, patient registries, how we integrate wearable devices into our healthcare ecosystem. We've been partnering the population to collect general health data through some of our apps and some of our national campaigns. But I think we have an opportunity there to think about where we go next, especially in collaboration or in partnership with some of the efforts around preventative population health. And this can only be achieved through further collaboration, patients, regulators, academia, and industry, to think about how the use of real-time data can be part of how we develop, improve, and regulate health products, including the next bound of that type of live consumer reporting that we've used, for example, around vaccines and unsafe medical products. How do you then use that principle of engaging the consumer as a sense-making, a signal-generating component of our collaboration when you talk about live, real-time data? And ultimately, use all this to risk mitigate in a timely fashion when new products are being deployed within our population. And in all this, we certainly need to learn from what's happening in the rest of the world, how to improve our healthcare system through patient partnership. For example, things like the European Commission's European Health Data Space, empowering patients to control and utilize their health data, with patients having immediate and easy access to data and sharing this data with other health professionals to improve healthcare delivery. We have to learn from the successes, we have to learn from the challenges of efforts such as these in other countries. And in order to do so, in order then to use these lessons to improve the healthcare delivery here in Singapore for our residents. The capabilities that we need here in our healthcare ecosystem also need to be developed to support wide-scale patient engagement, to take advantage of these new processes and to think through these new challenges in the future. The Duke-NUS Medical School Center of Regulatory Excellence was established in 2014 as the first Asian center dedicated to addressing the capacity development and policy innovation needs of stakeholders within the healthcare products ecosystem, and has since expanded its scope, its regulatory scope to cover, the regulation of health services and global health. CoRE is a neutral academic platform helping to raise awareness of best practices and add to the evidence base mapping patient engagement landscape here in Asia, and bringing stakeholders together who perhaps do not have many other opportunities to engage with one another. And convening stakeholders like yourselves gives you the opportunity to co-create solutions and approaches relevant to your context, but it gives us the opportunity then to learn from you and learn from the best in the world, finding opportunities to improve what we do here in Singapore. We hope we also create opportunities for CoRE to facilitate education and training in the various healthcare professionals that are involved in patient engagement and the patients themselves. So on this note, I'd like to congratulate the organizers for assembling an international coalition of patient engagement experts, advocates for this important dialogue. It provides us an opportunity to focus on patients and caregivers as both the core of our healthcare system, but the ultimate beneficiaries of what we do. Listening to practical ideas and insights from advocates, regulators, policymakers, healthcare professionals, academics, researchers, and industry. And as we get better at this, better at engaging patients, consumers, and society as collaborators and partners in the development of our healthcare services, we can reasonably expect increasingly positive patient-centered health outcomes, which will benefit all of us as patients ourselves one day. Thank you in advance to all our speakers, panelists, and delegates from over 18 economies who will be sharing your insights throughout this conference. I look forward to having many more of such discussions in the future. I wish you all a very pleasant, productive, and engaging conference ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Puducherry. We will now commence with Plenary 1 on patients as active partners in the development, regulation, and use of medicines. It gives us great pleasure to invite on stage the session chair for Plenary 1, Professor John Lim. Known to most present here, Professor Lim is the founding executive director of the Duke-NUS Center of Regulatory Excellence. He is also chairman of the Consortium for Clinical Research and Innovation Singapore and a senior advisor at Singapore's Ministry of Health. Professor Lim is also policy core lead at the SingHealth Duke-NUS Global Health Institute. Professor Lim, please.
Thank you very much, Lavanya. And just on behalf of the Duke-NUS Center of Regulatory Excellence, I'd like to thank our guest of honor, Senior Minister of State, Dr. Janil Puducherry, SMS for Communications and Information and Health. And thank you very much, of course, to Professor John Skerritt and Dr. Lembit Rago for a year's worth of hard work in terms of guiding the scientific committee. Thank you for the scientific committee participants and also my colleagues in CoRE. And thank you to all of you who are attending in person and virtually. As you can see, we're sort of adjusting to this transition to in-person meetings, hybrid meetings. Thank you for your patience, but it's delightful to see all of you. And for those of you online, please participate as well as you can. So as Professor John Skerritt said, we're going to jump right into the first plenary, which is really the first step in this whole journey of product development, where we're looking to patients as active partners in the development, regulation, and use of medicines. And we will have 4 very eminent speakers sharing their thoughts. We may not have that much time for the discussion today, but in this particular session, but we will have opportunity throughout this conference. But we would like to give as much time to the 4 speakers as possible. And I'd first like to introduce Dr. Margaret or Dr. Peggy Hamburg, a very old friend from our days when we headed regulatory agencies. Of course, Peggy had the huge job of heading the US FDA. I only had to head the HSA here in Singapore. But we really established a very strong relationship. And Peggy is a great advocate for patient engagement. When we had our first meeting of the Coalition to Accelerate Patient Engagement in the Asia Pacific in 2019, just before the pandemic, Peggy chaired that session, and she shared her great insights from her past experience, not just in the FDA, but in other experiences, both as Commissioner for Public Health in New York City and many other eminent positions she's held. And so without further ado, I'd like to hand the time over to Peggy to hear her thoughts. Please welcome her.
Well, thank you so much, John, and I'm just delighted to be here to focus on this important topic, a topic that matters for all of us. And this is certainly a great forum to discuss a set of critical issues that are centered on making sure that patients are partners in health and to address our shared goal of creating equitable access to health products and services. And to do so, we have to bring together the broad set of critical stakeholders, regulators, industry, academics, researchers, healthcare providers, and put patients at the center along with advocacy groups and caregivers. And that is the audience we're with today in person and virtually. As John Lim just outlined, this first session is focused on patients as active partners in the development, regulation, and use of medicines. And in this context, we must recognize that advancing biomedical product innovation from idea to discovery, to development, to product assessment, and ultimately to access and use is an ecosystem. We must think about the whole life cycle of a product, as our earlier speakers have noted. Industry, academia, government, and regulators are certainly key, but so are patients. Success requires true partnership. Success also requires hard work, sustained commitment, flexibility, and good science. And in my brief comments today, I really want to focus on the opportunities we have to better harness science to serve people and to serve patients and their vital needs. And I'll do so through the regulatory lens from my 6 years as US FDA Commissioner and also through my work with CoRE. Certainly, the rapid development of COVID vaccines demonstrated what can be done when there's a sense of urgency, focus, and resources. But it also revealed critical gaps in the ability to achieve the kind of equity and access that's vital for patients and consumers, vital for the health of all. And despite all the extraordinary advances in S&T, there's still so much work that needs to be done to address unmet medical care needs and public health needs, to get patients what is necessary on a day-to-day basis, as well as in emergencies. And as we think about how to get products, to how to get patients what they need and deliver on the power of science today, we have to acknowledge that assuring access to these products clearly requires new approaches and enhanced commitment in many aspects of the ecosystem, the chain of events that ultimately leads to patient access and use after a new product's development, as well as to developing the right products to address patient needs. One crucial link in that chain of events to patient access is the regulatory component. The role of regulation is often overlooked, underappreciated, and often maligned. It's a drag on innovation, people say. It's a barrier to progress. And perhaps people most especially feel this when it concerns patient access in emergencies or with life-threatening conditions. Understandably, people want products as quickly as possible, and they want those products to make a difference. However, without interpretable data to guide decision-making, we're relying on wishful thinking, which is not a good strategy. it does little to offer treatment blindly, hoping that it will work, or thinking at least we're doing something. Something must be better than nothing. But in fact, the only thing worse than no treatment is bad treatment. And the only thing worse than no diagnostic or vaccine is a bad diagnostic or vaccine, especially when millions and millions of people may be betting their lives on these medical interventions. They deserve better than a hunch or an empty hope. Newer doesn't necessarily mean better. And the inconvenient truth is that innovation doesn't really matter for patients if it doesn't work or does harm. But innovation is also about having the right regulatory processes and product development tools, which is why regulatory science is so important. And by that, I mean having the knowledge and tools needed to evaluate a product's safety, efficacy, quality, and performance. And it involves the development of new methods that can be used to improve and accelerate the development, review, approval, and ongoing oversight of medical products. Advancing regulatory science requires the full engagement of the scientific community, an array of disciplines and approaches, but it also means working across sectors and across borders. It involves new investments, approaches, and partnerships. And this importantly includes a much strengthened role for patients, a more patient-centered approach. Patients are increasingly demanding it, and critically, regulators, researchers, and drug companies are increasingly convinced that the patient input and voice can really make a difference. We need to do better. And certainly patients can help give us a renewed sense of urgency and purpose. But much more than that, they can help better define what needs to be done and help us get it done. Working with patients as active partners in the development, regulation, and use of medicines, we can see the many ways it makes a real difference, from getting the right research done in a timely way to confidence and trust by patients and consumers in the products developed. They can help better illuminate key aspects of the disease experience that matter for improved medical product development and help define meaningful treatment outcomes. They can enhance understanding and impact of side effects. And they can also help provide important, critical insights into risk tolerance and how best to weigh risks and benefits. Moreover, greater patient engagement can help us to shape clinical trials in ways that will make them more attractive and accessible for participation. Such things as moving clinical trials out of elite institutions into communities, using digital tools and telehealth to facilitate participation and reporting, using real-world data and other available strategies in terms of already collected data in new ways. We know that clinical trials are often dramatically slowed by patient enrollment delays, but enhanced patient engagement can in fact help step up the rate of patient enrollment in clinical trials and can create greater interest and enthusiasm for patient participation that will overall accelerate our clinical trials, in addition to helping us think about new approaches to streamline clinical trials that will provide us with rigorous science, but also help to speed the process. In addition, patients and advocacy groups can become important voices for greater investment in biomedical research. And all of this is crucial to our overall long-term sustained success. I first learned all of this way back many, many decades ago when I was just finishing up my medical training and it was the emergence of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. I was working with Dr. Tony Fauci at the National Institutes of Health on HIV drug development. And at that time, AIDS activists, particularly a group called ACT UP, were loud and strident in their concerns about delays and inadequacies in the research and development and regulatory review process. They protested outside and they were often taken away in handcuffs, in fact. But we decided to actually open the door rather than keep them out, to bring them to the table. And in fact, they made a very positive, constructive contribution. They had done their homework. In fact, I often felt that they knew more about the cutting edge research than in fact I did. They helped us think about how to design clinical trials in important new ways, how to think about new flexibility in the regulatory system. And in fact, many of the advances that they put forward became part of our thinking and our way of doing business to this day, such as accelerated approval in terms of the FDA regulatory systems. And so it was a critical fork in the road in many ways. And today, I think we are at another important juncture. There's so many challenges before us. The world is only getting more complicated. There are so many competing priorities for attention and resources. And today there is certainly more demand for value for every dollar spent on health and healthcare. Clearly, there are opportunities that we must embrace for regulatory science to promote better patient-centric care, to better meet the needs and expectations of patients and consumers, as well as those of our healthcare system and public health. Success requires adhering to the principles of scientific rigor and practice, but by examining how we do our work and how we can better engage patients across the arc of research and development, to regulatory processes, to the uptake and ongoing use of medical products, the life cycle of products, as we say. We can better define the kinds of products patients want and need. We can speed, streamline, and make clinical trials more accessible. We can more effectively deliver those products to those in need, and we can enhance trust and confidence in both products and the process of development and review. And so working together, we can truly deliver on the power of science for people in need, and we must do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peggy. We're now going to hear the perspective from Europe. And for this, we're delighted to have Dr. Juan Garcia Burgos, who's from the European Medicines Agency, and he's head of public and stakeholders engagement. Juan Garcia is a urologist surgeon by training from Madrid in Spain, and he joined the EMA in 2002 and was responsible for coordinating the preparation of EU clinical guidelines for drug development. Since 2017, Juan Garcia has been head of public and stakeholders engagement and is co-chair of the EMA Patients and Healthcare Professionals Working Party. And so with that, I'd like to warmly welcome Juan Garcia to share the EMA European perspective. Please welcome him.
So patients has been an integral part of our activities, and we feel very proud to promote this cooperation with patient organizations, which is very much an integral part of what we do. The agency was created in '95, and since the beginning, we started collaborating with patients. And I think it was very, very good to hear Peggy, as he mentioned that at the beginning, it wasn't really a collaboration. Maybe it was more listening activists, as we would call. And they were knocking our doors. They wanted to be involved in our processes. And actually it resulted very positively, and it improved very much the outcomes, so much that these good first results encourages us to continue working and to continue involving them in different activities. Then the new legislation in Europe allows patients to be part of the committees and be fully involved in benefit risk decision making at the core of the decision making. That was a huge shift, which again encouraged to progress and to continue more. Then we developed a proper framework to formalize this collaboration and acknowledge it. And it was then in 2014 when a specific function was created. And I'm very pleased to have here in this meeting the former executive director, because he was the one who had the vision to really create and formalize this collaboration and acknowledge that if you want to develop patient engagement, you need to have dedicated staff working on it, because it doesn't happen on its own. Then we started to develop further tools, public hearings, new methods, new ways to engage patients. And then the pandemic came. And the pandemic has been a critical moment because it has given more emphasis to the fact that having these relations with patients actually help a lot. The pandemic has put regulatory authorities, medicines regulatory authorities, in the center of what we had to deliver. And to navigate the crisis for Europe has been very instrumental to have access to these organizations, to these patients who help us a lot in delivering the messages, in delivering trust, to ensure that what the authorities were doing were well understood by the public, and that we were able to combat misinformation, which has been one of the main elements that we have to address during the pandemic. The result is that now we can conclude that we have a systematic engagement along the life cycle of medicines, and more we involve patients in every activity that we have. So when we say in every activity, we try to look at the life cycle. And we, of course, have a say in development of medicines through scientific advice, orphan designations, etc. And I think we again say that they are fully involved. Patients are fully systematically involved in these activities. When it comes to assessment, we also have experts in the different committees as well, supporting and advising us to ensure that our decisions are the right ones and that they are really meeting their needs. But then in the post-authorization phase, again, they have a relevant role. And now more with all the changes, the rapid changes that digitalization are bringing, the use of real-world evidence, all these elements are really changing the way that patient data is supporting decision-making. And using these representations which comes from the guidance that Lembit has showed before, and which try to illustrate how complex is the ecosystem, but how much they contribute to every single aspect during pre-authorization, but also during post-authorization. In Europe, we have tried to structure this interaction through pillars of the framework, where we understand that patient involvement comes from qualitative experiences from different patients which are involved at different moments, but also we focus very much on the generation of data, patient experience data for benefit risk decision making, which comes from patient reported outcomes, for patient preferences, etc. At the same time, there is an element of enhancing the patients and the consumers' understanding of the medicines regulation and which is their role. And then to contribute to effective communication, acknowledging that communicating on the safety of medicines, on the benefit and safety of medicines, is one of our main deliverables as regulators. In terms of structuring this interaction, we look very much to individual experts, but also we collaborate at the level of organizations. And I think this is the right balance for us, because it allows us to reach individuals which are going to support the specific questions when we evaluate certain medicines, but allows us to reach as well to organizations, because sometimes they are involved in different initiatives, policy discussions, etc. So to do that, we have built a network of organizations to which any organization is welcome to apply and to participate. but they need to fulfill certain criteria, which somehow ensure that there is a quality control of those organizations. This criteria refers to activities, to transparency in terms of activities, but also in terms of funding, etc., which allows us to really have some kind of scrutiny and guarantees that these organizations genuinely are working on the interest of patients. It's not only about product evaluation. Again, we have a lot of discussions and we involve patients in all our discussions. Whenever we have new legislation to implement, new initiatives, new policy discussions, and we do that through these organizations, and we have established permanent forums, working parties with patients and with healthcare professionals, which are supported and which are part of the work of the agency, and that they equally work together and support the work of the committees. The methods that we have been developed over the years are many. And what is important is that one size does not fit all. We need to really make a proportional use of these methods, because not all activities require the same level of engagement, the same level of details, and the same level of discussions. Patient engagement is expensive. It makes the process more complex. And we need to ensure that it is proportionate to the discussion at stake. Added value is something that we have been discussing a lot. There has been, especially at the beginning when we started engaging patients, maybe a request, a constant request to ensure that, okay, you involve patients, you need to demonstrate that there is an added value out of it. And I think we have demonstrated in many examples. I mentioned here some, for example, involvement in scientific advice, where we can, and this can be explained in the next slide, we have been able to quantify and give some qualitative examples of how patient engagement has really made the difference in the advice given to developers when working on new products. Or in safety monitoring, how input from patients led to shape risk minimization measures which resulted in safer medicines. For example, in the case of scientific advice, a survey over 4 years have demonstrated that the input from the patients made a significant change to the discussion, but also a significant change to the final advice given to developers. And that's for that quite striking. The advice being focused on discussions on selection of endpoints, acceptability of studies, elements of quality of life, etc. Equally, the review of documents, where patients at the agency are involved in most of the documents which are addressed to patients, such as the package leaflet. 50% of the comments from patients have led to some changes. So just to conclude, we consider that the voice of the patients is critical. It's critical throughout the whole life cycle of the medicine. We involve them in many of our activities, and even in taking decisions about benefit risk. They have important part to play, and they help us gathering, analyzing, and using real-world data. And this is something which is changing at the speed, which is so rapid that we need to really keep stock of all these changes in order to ensure that the patients can continue to contribute. We are looking at ways to expand the use of real-world evidence, patient-reported outcomes, patient preferences, and patient experience data in general. We need to foster and to develop methodologies to facilitate that this data is generated, is analyzed, and is used for decision-making, pre-authorization, but also during the post-marketing phase to ensure that medicines remain safe. The combination of all these data sources will result in safer and more effective medicines for everyone. And finally, to highlight that based on our experience, the many benefits of involving patients outweighs by far the challenges involved. We acknowledge the process may become more complex. There is a need to invest resources, manage conflict of interest and other issues, but I think it's a must, it's a necessary element that we need to introduce in order to have the better results and the better outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juan Garcia, for that very clear presentation on the European Medicines Agency perspective. We're now going to hear the perspective from Asia. And for this, we're delighted to have Dr. Yasuhiro Fujiwara, who's Chief Executive of the Pharmaceuticals and Medical Devices Agency of Japan. Dr. Fujiwara has been Chief Executive of the PMDA since 2019, and he is a medical oncologist by training, specializing in breast cancer. He's also co-chair of the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities since 2019 as well. And he's been very active, not just in his past experience, but currently as PMDA Chief Executive in promoting public and patient involvement. And so I'm delighted to invite Dr. Fujiwara to share his perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm Yasuhiro Fujiwara from PMDA, so I will talk on the basis of the Asian standpoint. And since first of all, I have to say that Japan is far behind FDA or EMA's patient engagement activities, so probably the same as the Singapore or other Asian regions. This is young. I'm so young, I'm 35 years old. I like to touch my experience so far. I work at a hospital as a medical oncologist for almost 35 years. It means I face patients every day and feel what each patient feel, think, afraid, etc. Based on such experiences, I strongly recognize importance of public patient involvement and took action to promote it in Japan. This is my priority at PMDA. I said 4 first. One of them is patient first. Good communication with patients is essential to promote patient access. Asia first, and also safety first. I prioritize these 4 first as when I get the position at PMDA. Every PMDA staff work in own mind every day, maybe. I would like to share a current situation on patient engagement in Japan. In Japan, patient engagement is instilling among stakeholders, including academia, industry, and regulators. Top 1 academic research group supported by AMED, this is a funding agency, discussed public patient involvement and published PPI guidebook as shown here. I lead this group as a chair and facilitate the discussion. You can read the whole document in English in website, as you can see in this URL under this slide. An industry association published report on results of their analysis and thoughts, and also some consortium had been established in Japan. For example, PPI Japan is one of active consortium. This group translated UPATI toolbox. Probably UPATI is famous among European region, and the next speaker will touch on this UPATI tool. But we have a Japanese translation of UPATI tool. It's educational tool developed by UPATI and release good education tool to the public. This is the expectation to PPI. And PPI is implemented for a long time, but not so be instilled in Asia, as I said before. Public and patients are key stakeholders to develop medical products and also generate clinical evidence. We should establish more well communication with public and patient to develop innovative products efficiently. Why does PPI is necessary? PPI brings benefit to multiple stakeholders. for researchers and also patients and public. These benefits are expected, I think. I would like to touch on some global situation in regulatory science. In the US and Europe, patient representatives have been participating in various meetings and expressing their thoughts. And this trend is being spread around the world. For example, ICH is working in incorporate patient voices in the process of revising the GCP guidance. In addition, ICH has been discussing on patient-focused drug development, which is expected to eventually lead to harmonized guideline. Next topic is interaction with patient group in Japan. This picture was taken when PMDA staff members of SMA Family Association. SMA is a spinal muscular atrophy. We received requests for early approval of SMA treatment directly from patients and their families. And we also met members of Japanese Society of Patients and Families with mucosaccharidosis. We will continue to work keeping in mind the honest wish and urgent need of patients and their families for the effective treatment. In order to incorporate patient voices in our activities such as drug review and risk management, I believe PMDA needs to work keeping PPI in mind. This is why I set up patient centricity group working group soon after taking office as a chief executive of PMDA. While the release was behind the initial plan, the working group published a guidance to realize the patient first priority in September 2021. This guidance explains how to correct and reflect information from patients and how to provide information to patients. The English version of the guidance is available in the link shown in the lower one side of this slide. Please check it out if you're interested. I have experienced our engagement. I have explained our engagement in exchanging opinions with patients and releasing a guidance. But there are still many challenges, including infrastructure development to incorporate patient voices into the life cycle of pharmaceuticals and medical devices from the development to post-marketing phase. We also need to work on increasing patients' awareness and understanding of pharmaceutical regulations and PMDA. So we are going to keep working this initiative for further process. Today I talked expectations to PPI and Japanese challenge, especially in PMDA. I think public and patients are essential stakeholders. We should engage them to drug development, risk management, and so on. Currently, some established patient representatives are actively working in this area. But how about next generation? In order to maintain a sustainable environment, it is necessary to nurture the next generations. Patient groups are good at doing the peer support, but not good at doing the neutral opinion saying during the ministries, committees, or other things. So we have to train. As you can see in the EMA's guys, slides, EMA and the FDA has a good educational tool for those patient groups. So those kind of tools, preparation is essential in the Asian region. And as I talked in my presentation, PMDA started communication with some of rare disease patient group. we would like to strengthen such communications because our staff is a little bit lacking the clinical experience. So they don't understand what the patients really feel or think. So I encourage our staff to communicate with the patient representative, and they know what is the diseases and what the patients and their families are thinking. This is very important, especially for the rare disease. And in addition to these actions, promoting health literacy is also important. PMDA hired a specialist to enhance communication between PMDA and public. We plan to establish explanatory corner on drug development in our website to public. For example, you know the difference between the US FDA's emergency use authorization and EMA's conditional marketing authorization or Japanese special approval for emergency. Everyone do not know, and every physician and surgeon in the clinical practice do not know about that. So I have to change my, I have to make my PMDA's website to explaining those differences in which the layperson can understand. An active utilization of patient-reported outcome is also one of the important tasks of PMDA. To proceed, we will communicate with stakeholders shown here. I believe that PPI is essential for PMDA's work. It is difficult to implement it quickly, but we would like to steadily promote its penetration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fujiwara. I think there was a very important perspective, as Dr. Fujiwara reminded us, because this conference is really focusing on promoting patient engagement in the Asia Pacific. And so I think there is a lot that we will need to focus on as we look at the consensus statement going forward. Now, we've heard from 3 regulators, whether past or present, but it would be very strange for us to go through the plenary without hearing the patient voice. And so we're delighted to have Mr. Francois Houillet, who is the Director of Treatment Information and Access at the European Organization for Rare Diseases, or EURORDIS. And Francois is from France, and he has been with EURORDIS working as a patient advocate since the early 90s, first in HIV/AIDS advocacy and in rare diseases since 2003. And actually, he pioneered patient advocacy with the EMA as part of the first patients delegation that engaged dialogue with the agency back in 1996. So I'm delighted to invite Francois to share his perspectives, and then we will go straight into a very short panel discussion after that.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and good morning. So I will share a few successes in patient engagement, and it's not a fair choice because there are so many examples of successful engagement with patients, and a few words of on challenges, which I think we will continue in the discussion. So how do I change this? Can I have some with this? Okay. Thank you very much. So first, just a very few words on EURORDIS, so the European Organization for Rare Diseases. We are a very large network of more than 1,000 patient groups in Europe and beyond, because we are represented in 74 countries. Well, we have members in 74 countries, and that includes 14 in Southeast Asia. And we think we represent 2,000 distinct rare diseases. Importantly, we have patients as experts of their own disease, and we really help authorities like the EMA when they need to find these patients. We help to identify the patients and we explain them the procedures where they are invited to take part. I think it's also important to again explain some history in modern treatment activism and the role of patient advocates, and that's largely started in the US in the beginning of the 80s. And at that time, it was difficult for patient groups, for HIV people, even to attend scientific conferences to learn where research was going, because none of them were scientists and they were denied access to the conferences. So one group of 13 of them joined in a meeting where they defined the principles of HIV and AIDS patient advocacy movements. And on the right here, I extracted three of them, three of the principles, which I think are universal. They apply to all diseases, that we need to define our own strategies as patients, that we want to be involved at every level of decision-making. And when we are involved, we wish to be recognized with equal credibility as all other experts around the table. And this is one of the principles explained in this book, the guiding principles of patient advocacy. I think it's principle number 2, to sit with equal credibility as other experts. So some cases, some examples, and the first one, which reflects a high quality dialogue, was part of a community advisory board, and a community advisory board is a group of 10, 15, 20 patients who are trained. They know what is needed to develop a medicine and to evaluate a medicine, and they commit to follow up the project, the development over the years. And we had a group of 12 patients, 12 parents and 1 child with cystinosis, and they were discussing the development of a gene therapy with the developer. And the protocol of the clinical trial said that the children should stop their current therapy, the eye drops, 2 months before administration of the gene therapy. And for the parents, that was not possible because they had educated their children to use the eye drops 3-4 times a day with no interruptions, otherwise crystal could form. So this is not about hard science. This is not about complex clinical trial design. It's exactly parents expressing their perspectives to the sponsor and the investigators of that trial. And this was not a detail for the parents, but if the company would have skipped this consultation with patients, they would certainly have made problems when recruiting patients in the clinical trial, because for the parent, it was a no. They did not want to stop the treatment. So the company went back to their pharmacologist and they reassessed the question, and they in fact decided that the gene therapy could be administered the next day after the last eye drops, and the clinical trial could finally start. Another example, much more sophisticated, started when Nick Siro had a child born with another rare disease, AKU, in 2003. And Nick created this consortium here of academics, other patient groups, and a pharmaceutical company as partner. He joined our summer school to learn more on the research and development. And then he obtained a European Commission grant to fund a phase 1 trial to test a product that was used off-label. So it was a repurposing project. And they could identify participants for a phase 3 trial that started in January 2019. So it was a drug repurposing project because nitisinone was already used to treat tyrosinemia. And they signed, they contracted with Sobi as industrial partner. They took the initiative to seek scientific advice at the European Medicines Agency to discuss their development plan and their phase 3 trial. And they obtained a positive opinion in 2020 on a new indication for this product. And now they continue with HTA and pricing and reimbursement. But more than that, this consortium and the patient groups are now identifying all patients with alkaptonuria in the world, because more research is needed, more exchange of information is needed. We need to engage more patients with more agencies and with more research projects for that disease. So it's the patient group who continues to identify patients. I'd also like to say a few words about Spencer Cox, who was an AIDS activism hero. He died in 2012. He was the founder of Adjunct, New York, and he designed a pivotal trial. And when I say he designed, he literally designed. He refused the trial design that the company had proposed, and I will explain what he suggested. Before this trial, typically for HIV and AIDS, for phase 3 trials, people who had been recently infected with HIV were recruited in clinical trials. They were at a low risk of AIDS, around 3% per year. So to demonstrate efficacy, you had to recruit thousands of patients in clinical trials that would last for 3 to 4 years. And in authors, we identify these trials as these trials where you count dead bodies. So what he did, he proposed to recruit very advanced patients, a bit more than 1,000 of them, at a very high risk of death, 25% per year, to randomize between the product and placebo, double-blinded, short duration, 9 months. And it was extremely difficult to run this trial from an ethical perspective, because clinicians knew after 2 weeks who was on placebo and who wasn't. The company agreed with this trial design, and in January 96, the results were presented at the Conference on Retroviruses and Opportunistic Infections. And you see the difference between mortality in placebo and treatment arms. These had never been seen before in the fight against HIV, 58% reduction. Less than a month later, the FDA gave an approval to this product, and the EMA gave an opinion in 59 days because the data were so clear, because the trial was so robust that there was no question that this product really could make a difference. And what is also remarkable is that, in fact, not only the regulators, but nobody knows exactly clearly that it's patients who designed this clinical trial that really made a difference, because we rarely publish what we do. There is a lot of gray literature, but there is not much published literature. But their roles continued, and here is what HIV groups continue to engage in Europe with the authorities after the product was authorized. First, to solve the difficulty for people who were in jail. This product initially had to be stored in the fridge, so the patient groups made sure that the research on stability at room temperature would be conducted rapidly and authorized rapidly for prisoners to be able to use the product. In 98, there was a shortage of the capsules, and patients had to switch to a liquid formulation, and this had to be prepared by, together with the company and all regulatory authorities. It's not very easy to switch and to organize management of a shortage of a life-saving product. In 99, that was when patients who had been treated for long periods realized that they had body shape changes and they were taking weight. So they reported this on social networks, on social media, and both the FDA and EMA started to collect data on what that was. And the EMA created an oversight committee commissioning 4 post-authorization studies where patients participated, because it was important to continue to measure the benefit risk in light of this new risk and to discuss how to communicate the results to patients. And also because the product is one of the most potent cytochrome inhibitor known, the patient groups worked this time with an academic center in Liverpool to inform patients who are using different products about drug-drug interactions, not only authorized products, but also illicit drugs where the drug-drug interactions could be life-threatening. So it was another kind of engagement with an academic center to develop a tool for people using illicit products to know what risk they were taking when using this cytochrome inhibitor. And many other aspects for the safe use of medicines, where the patient groups continue to work both with authorities and companies. The compassionate use, the placing on the market, but also the review, the evidence on the risk of HIV transmission when HIV is no longer detected. There is no guarantee of success when you engage with patients. This last example is another meeting of a community advisory board on tuberous sclerosis, where the CAB discussed the development of an anti-epileptic drug, and the product was proposed for children compared to standard of care defined as 3 anti-epileptic products. But in fact, most children were using 4 or 5 anti-epileptic products. It was a kind of off-label use, but parents find the way to get the number of products they needed to control the seizures in their children. And so the proposal of the company to test, to compare the new product to 3 products only was rejected by the parents because they did not want their children to suffer from seizures. And after 2 years of discussion, there was no trial design that could really answer the question which comparator to use. And so the discussion was in a dead end and the development had been stopped. There is no guarantee of success, but at least they tried all they could to discuss with clinicians. They requested also scientific advice, but there are cases where even with the best engagement and the best will, you can't find a solution. So to finish some challenges, I think the political willingness to engage is an important factor. Not all regulatory authorities or pharmaceutical companies are willing or ready to engage with patients. The sooner you start, the better. And one normal, natural way is to start with working on safety issues, pharmacovigilance, patient information. There are good reasons to engage. Nobody can criticize you to start from there and then expand to other topics. The patient group's awareness of regulatory procedures, I think for the patients, the most difficult is to know when exactly you can share your concern, your questions in the regulatory procedures. 210 days to provide an opinion on the benefit risk evaluation. It seems to be long, but in fact, it's very fast. And to explain to patients who would like to ask questions or to express their views to the scientific committee is already a difficulty because sometimes they have no idea how this works. And we need to develop and to explore new methods for the involvement of patients. It is more than just consulting with 1 or 2. We need to develop all possible tools to provide a broader patient input at different moments in time in the development and the evaluation of medicines. And I thank you for your attention.
Speakers up. Thank you very much, Francois, for that. We're just going to have time really to, I'm just going to pose a broad question to the panel. Thank you very much, Dr. Fujiwara, Peggy, and Juan Garcia. To round off this first plenary, having heard one another, and also because really the focus is to try and advance patient engagement in the Asia Pacific, and we are heading towards a consensus statement in the last session tomorrow. Having heard one another and from the point of what has been happening in the sort of more advanced settings in the US and Europe, and Dr. Fujiwara has described the example of Japan, what are your sort of main takeaways or advice that you would give to the whole Asia Pacific region? That's a very broad sort of question. from your perspectives, what you've heard from one another this morning, in terms of key recommendations to really move things forward in the patient engagement space. And perhaps I'd just like to go in the order of the panelists, starting with Juan Garcia, Peggy, and Dr. Fujiwara, and I'll ask Francois to close off with his thoughts. So, Juan Garcia.
Thank you. I think in terms of moving forward, I think I welcome these discussions very much. I think international and global collaboration is helping a lot. I think patient engagement has not been on the agenda of international discussions so often, and I think we can see that this is now changing. And this helps a lot because different regions have developed their policies and their frameworks at different speeds. We have, for example, engaged a lot with FDA, and I think we have learned very much, we have benefited mutually very much of these discussions. So if we can enlarge that at a more global scale, it will facilitate. And I think it's not fair to say that maybe advanced regions can teach or can help less advanced regions. I think we can all benefit from it because I think the environment is changing so much and so rapidly that we are faced with new situations and new challenges. And I think having a follow-up discussion at global level can help a lot.
Thank you. Well, I certainly agree with the last point made and the importance of really learning from each other and working together and really committing to doing this. I think that, you know, what really struck me listening to the panel is the fact that we have to institutionalize this. It's not sort of something we do sometimes. It really has to be built into our thinking and our systems, our ways of doing things, and you know, the whole process from start to finish. And I really think, and thank Francois for his last presentation, because I think the demonstration of the positive difference that it makes, that enables better studies to be done, in fact, stronger scientific evaluation in many cases. And you can't do this work if the patients aren't full partners. And I really think, you know, that it was a powerful demonstration from the examples you presented of that fact.
The only message I want to say is do not be lush. Gradually it will improve. So right now we are all behind from the United States and the EMAs, but also the EU can do that. There are 25 or more countries that they exist and their culture is different, but they can do that. So yeah, our Asian countries are so many and culturally and region is very different, but we can do maybe after 5 years, after 10 years, but we have to keep on going.
Maybe I'd like to quote Jean-Michel Alexandre, who was the first chair of the scientific committee at EMA, who said that with a high quality dialogue, patients and regulators can only agree. And to establish a high quality dialogue, we first need to understand each other. There is a cultural, sometimes dimension to this. And that's why training such as the summer school we have at Rodis is important. And it's a summer school where advocates from the world can attend. And I encourage all regions to have similar platforms where the scientific staff of agencies and patients who already have some experience engaging with the regulatory authorities can explain to other patients, can train other patients about the procedures, the best way to engage with regulators, but also for regulators to learn the expectations from patients. So mutual training where both patients and regulators participate as trainers and sometimes as trainees, I think is certainly the first step that can happen.
Well, thank you very much. It's been such a rich session. We're a bit short of time, so we really cannot pursue the panel discussion, but I'd really like to thank our panelists and speakers this morning. I've been personally very inspired hearing what has happened already in the sort of more developed settings, what is happening in Japan. And I think Francois really sort of brought it together in terms of how patients are moving the needle and things forward. And that's really a great inspiration, I think, for patient groups within our part of the world in Southeast Asia and the Asia Pacific. So I think that's an excellent start to the conference, and there's a lot more ahead of us. So we look forward to further engagement. And please join me in thanking Juan Garcia, Peggy, Dr. Fujiwara, and Francois. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panel for a very interesting and stimulating discussion. Thank you, Professor Lim, for chairing this session. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Day 2 of the 2022 Duke-NUS CoRE Scientific Conference on Patients as Partners for Health, Co-Creating Equitable Access to Health Products and Services. We hope you enjoyed the presentations and discussions yesterday around applying and adapting global best practices in patient engagement in the development and access to health products. The conference started with the discussion on how we view patients as active partners in the development, regulation, and use of medicine. We addressed deeper issues such as preclinical and clinical development, benefit and risk assessments from a regulatory point of view, key challenges around HTA and access, and finally rounding off with a discussion on communication in safety and healthcare delivery. This morning, the second plenary will focus on putting the patient at the forefront of patient engagement. We are very honored to have this session chaired by Mr. Rajakant, who is well known to many of us present here and may require little introduction for his passionate work as an avid patient advocate with 20 years of experience in healthcare advocacy, policy, and governance. Mr. Rajakant is the Executive Director at Rainbow Across Borders, where he has created and led specific illness patient access programs and campaigns. In addition, he is also the Principal Consultant at Manifest, where he has been creating solutions for multiple stakeholders in economically and culturally diverse countries in the Asia-Pacific region. Mr. Rajakant is also instrumental in the launch and success of the Coalition to Accelerate Patient Engagement at CoRE. Please welcome Mr. Rajakant.
Hi, morning. I think it's nice to meet all of you, but I think we're missing about half the hall. Thank you very much for coming on time. I'm going to have a panel with Professor Carmencita from Philippines. I'm going to have Prof. Tarun from Perth, as well as Elizabeth from Spain. The panel, now we're going to be focusing on putting the patient at the forefront of patient engagement. This morning, it's just going to be me because everyone else is dialing in. But I'm going to try and add some of you out there into this whole conversation. And I've already briefed you guys earlier on, so I think they've all sat in a line. We're going to try and get the industry perspective as well, because we've got public health perspective, we've got the physician's perspective, and we've got the patient perspective as well. So I think with that, I'd like to introduce my first speaker, Professor Carmencita from University of Philippines. Dr. Carmencita is a professor of pediatrics at the College of Medicine and currently Chancellor of the University of Philippines, Manila. She's the founding director of the Institute of Human Genetics and the Newborn Screening Reference Center at the National Institute of Health. I've known Professor Carmen for a number of years. I think her involvement in rare disease, her work with the patient organizations is stellar. And I think we've not seen that. I've not seen that. Actually, I picked up many tips from Dr. Carmen, and I think I'm glad to have her with us this morning. Let me present Professor Carmencita Padilla to you.
So my talk is really putting the patient at the forefront. And I'm going to talk about the roles of the patients in patient engagement. And in the process, I'm going to present the ways wherein patients can be engaged in the healthcare system. So let's redefine the roles of the patients. I mean, for decades now, I've been part of the healthcare system. And for the longest time, the patient was really a passive participant in the management of his his or her disease. And it's not really just for rare diseases, it's really for diseases in general. And the role of the patient was really a recipient of the treatment. And if the patient is a child, it's really the parents who are talking or discussing the case with the physicians. But times have changed. And, you know, in the past 10 years that I have worked with rare diseases, I'm a geneticist by profession, I have seen a different role for patients. Now the patient engagement is recognized as an integral part of healthcare. You listen to them. You ask them how they feel and what they want. The patient is the center of every conversation, not the parents, but the patient. And the patient is empowered to make informed decisions about his or her own health. And as a matter of fact, these thoughts are not just for rare diseases. It's really for all diseases that we encounter in our daily lives as physicians. So I'm going to talk about now the many ways that we have engaged the families here in the Philippines, as primarily as a set of my examples. So let's start. I've got 4 major pillars here. And let me start by saying that the patients and the families really participate. They have to actively participate in stakeholder meetings on policies and rare diseases. And they have to join the lobby efforts. And lobby efforts is really at the beginning, at the passage of the law, and afterwards. So let me show you a couple of examples here. So these are the families who joined me when we were lobbying for the rare disease law. It's very important for our senators and congressmen to see that how they look like and that they're just like all of us here. And they have a simple message that they want to deliver, that we all have the right to the quality of life. And that's for the normal people, the parents and the children and the advocates. So in the lobby for the law, I actually brought them along. They were my backdrop for my lobby because it's so important for the leaders to see that they are just like us, except that they have a particular disease. And I can tell you this was a very long lobby for us. 3 congresses in a span of 8 years. And finally, when it was passed, it was shared, of course, with the families and the legislators who eventually said yes to the law. But as I said, passing the law is just one. The next step is now how do you implement it. So the next part will be engaging them in the dissemination. So the first part was lobbying. Now how do you tell the world? How do you tell the doctor that, you know, we are important just like any other patient? And I'm going to give you a couple of examples here wherein Decoy, one of probably my oldest lobbyists at this point, was really born normal. He started presenting symptoms at the age of 10. You can see he was a normal kid, swimming, running, and playing. But at the age of 16, was diagnosed to have Pompe. He was misdiagnosed as a case of muscular dystrophy at the beginning. But, you know, when he was alive beyond the age of 14, they knew the diagnosis was wrong. He actually continues to share his story in all of our events. And if I can just share with you that just yesterday afternoon, I missed the session yesterday afternoon because we have a road show this time for the telling the lay people, the public, as well as the health professionals on the integrated rare disease management program of the Department of Health. And you can see that the mother is Cynthia, and we have here Juan or Decoy as one of the speakers. And I think it's this kind of dissemination that's important, wherein the patients are now actually giving the talk about the condition. Here's another patient. Danielle actually shares the testimonial on how she was saved by newborn screening. She was in school at this time. She's actually now working and planning to become a lawyer. And this one is now telling everybody that newborn screening is important. Despite the fact that it was passed in 2004, we have to continue the campaign to make sure that the patients are not forgotten because we continue to lobby for the benefits for the children. So this program is now implemented in 7,400 hospitals. And right now, it is the patients now who join me in the panels to explain to the world that in my country and, you know, the insurance companies that we have The patients have to continue to be supported by the benefits of government. So instead of my telling the doctors and the legislators that it is important, it is now the patients and their parents who join the panel and explain that we exist and we have to continue working for the policies and providing for more benefits for the children and their families. Now, one big factor, and I know that we had some discussion yesterday on getting more researchers in the field, getting more data in the field, and because we need it for the health technology assessment, I want to share with you that I am still struggling with the health technology assessment in the Philippines, and it is very important for the patients to really understand that they have to be participants in all of these researches to make sure that we send the message to our policymakers that we have to continue providing the budget. So in the Philippines, I just want to show that they are partners. If there's an opportunity for a clinical trial, then they will volunteer. The parents understand that without the data from the Philippines, it's so difficult to defend insurance and the rest. So I do have a problem in my setting, and I'm sure it is shared by the other doctors and physicians in the other low and middle income countries. Having the data in a developed country doesn't always help. It is important to show that we do have the data in the local setting and that it's going to be part of the local data sets. So data sets are so important for the health technology assessment. And regardless of what legislation we're talking about, it is important that we not only cite the experiences from the developed programs, but we have to produce the data for the low and middle income countries. So as far as the treatments for our patients, for the expensive treatments right now, they're actually provided under compassionate use. And for the medications that are affordable, then of course they're provided by government or provided by or paid for by the patient, despite the fact that we have the Universal Health Care Act that was passed in 2019. It is not yet in full implementation. And if you can imagine that if an ordinary patient has problems with universal health care, what more with the patients with rare diseases? And we need all the information from our neighbors because we use this to justify the support for our patients here in the Philippines and for the rest of the low and middle income countries. The last part is for their engagement in the advocacy campaigns. As I said, advocacy does not end with the passage of the law. And together with the rest of the world, we actually celebrate the Rare Disease Day at the end of February, which is the Rare Disease Day. We join the rest of the world to tell them that we are one with you. We have to improve the voice of the children and the adults with rare diseases. And when we're together at the end of February telling the rest of the world, then I think we will be heard. We have a big campaign at the World Health Organization that by 2024, the rare diseases will be covered by universal health care. So it's very important for patients from all over the world to speak up and be heard and be seen. It is not important that we doctors talk about it. It is important they are part of the conversation. The activities are not just simple ones. We show that they're very active and can be part of they share their stories with the rest of the doctors and health workers. And this is one of the activities in one of the years of the celebration. We conduct a lot of fundraising campaigns, and this is a film showing sponsored by the Philippine Society for Orphan Disorders. So I think, it's very important for doctors and patients to be together. So in my very short presentation, I showed that these are the 4 pillars as far as patient engagement is concerned: participating in stakeholder meetings for policies and being part of the lobby efforts even after the passage of the law, and dissemination of information beyond the passage of the law, and also being part of the research so that we can actually be able to support the health technology assessment in our own countries. Advocacy does not end with legislation. Advocacy begins before, during, and after. And with that, thank you for giving us this opportunity to share with you on the different pillars that we can that can be used by the patients in the lobby for the rare diseases. Thank you. And back to you, Raj.
Thank you, Dr. Padilla. I think this is the first time I've seen a physician speak in union with the patient so clearly. 4 pillars: policy development, participation in research, dissemination of information, and active involvement in advocacy events. I think if you looked at the slides, what's quite unique is she's presented it from the lens of the patient rather than from a physician. And having worked with Dr. Padilla, I think this is her giving, this is a gift. She's presented the patient voice before any clinical input as well. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Olen. She's actually in Spain. It's 2:30 right now. So Elizabeth is a mixed methods researcher with expertise in patient engagement and role of patient experience data in drug development, health technology assessment, and real-world research. Before founding Applied Patient Experience, Elizabeth served on senior leadership team at the National Health Council. So not to make her wait too long, Elizabeth, good morning. Very early morning.
That's right. Thank you, Raj. Can you hear me okay? Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to at least be joining you virtually. I wish I was there in person with everybody. I'm going to just be sharing my slides, so bear with me for one moment. All right. And I think I probably get an excuse for at least a little bit longer for the, it's 2:30 here. So let me see. All right, I think you should be seeing my slides right now. So I'm so excited to be here and to be able to speak with you a little bit about what I've learned over the years and how things have changed in patient engagement since I got involved in this space and since we as a community started working together to put the patient first, certainly when it comes to patient-focused drug development, which is really going to be the lens that I'll be speaking about, is really in the context of how can patients be involved, how can we put patients at the forefront of drug development. So I'm going to frame this essentially as lessons learned and then some resources that folks who are in the patient community and the research community can use right away to get started, to continue your efforts, and also to learn more after the conference ends about what's already been done and what are some of the opportunities going forward as well. So I wanted to start off just with a quick level setting definition, because I think that can be helpful for folks in terms of centering what are we talking about from the research community and from the patient community when it comes to patient engagement and research. And so this is a really nice definition that I like to use because it's a consensus definition that was developed with research community and with the patient community as well. And also looking back at a lot of work that was done in clinical research and patient engagement because it's based off of a literature review that looked at many patient engagement efforts in the context of healthcare delivery as well. So when we think of patient engagement and research, we're talking about the active, meaningful, and collaborative interaction between patients and researchers across all stages of the research process, where research decision-making is guided by patients' contributions as partners, recognizing their specific experiences, values, and expertise. So I think it's really important to recognize kind of the two pieces that are going on in this definition is, first of all, that the engagement is not tokenistic. We're taking the time to get to know patients as individuals, but also to make sure that we give them the time and space to be able to voice their, their thoughts, their experiences, needs, what are unmet need burden. But then the second half of the definition is guided by, decision-making is guided by. So what that means is that we're not going to be able to use every single detail that patients tell us is important to them, but we, as researchers, the onus is on us to use patient experiences and to use that information to guide decisions, regulators to use information provided by patients to guide their decisions, and to be really clear about what that looks like and how that's being done. So I have the reference at the bottom of the page if you're interested in digging more into that paper also. And then I also wanted to kind of step back and look at where we are, where we've come from. And, I think one thing about this space is it's super exciting to see more and more people becoming interested and engaged in this area. But I think that sometimes there can be a tendency towards duplication of effort also when people become newly really excited about a space that hasn't been around for super long necessarily. And so I think it's helpful oftentimes to, take the time to do that mini lit review and figure out what were the things that people who were working in this space 5, 6, 7 years ago were thinking were outstanding issues, and how have we actually worked to overcome those issues? What are the continued outstanding challenges? And those are the ones that we want to make sure we're tackling, and to build off of what's already been done by others. Take the time to look and see what those challenges were and what's out there as a starting point. And so I wanted to just highlight, this is from a dialogue, a roundtable, a meeting, you could say, that happened all the way back in 2015. And this was a multi-stakeholder meeting. And, this is a US context, because this was a meeting that happened in the United States, but individuals from, global researchers were also contributing to this. But maybe doesn't reflect all of the challenges today, but reflects challenges at that time. So, thinking back to 2015, these were some of the buckets where, there was a lot of excitement about patient engagement and drug development, but there was also quite a bit of caution about what that looks like and what's possible, and what types of maybe regulatory guardrails need to be in place, what types of compliance challenges are there in terms of doing this, right. And so at that time, the challenges were bucketed into 3 primary areas. So regulatory or legal uncertainty, culture barriers, as well as communication barriers. And so, what were these items? So regulatory or legal uncertainty, thinking about, in this space, highly regulated industry, where a huge amount of investment is needed to produce evidence that's going to be reviewed. And so obviously there's a lot of different evidence that's needed. There's a lot of different stakeholders and decision makers across the world for different decisions that are going to be reviewing the evidence. And so, one of the challenges is if we take the time, if we make the investments to engage patients to do a really good job of collecting patient experience data, how is that information actually going to be used by regulators? Quite bluntly, is it worth the investment? Is it actually going to be used? Patient interactions is another one that was, there was a lot of questions about would patient engagement activities be perceived as pre-marketing, pre-approval marketing? If you are a company that is having discussions with patients, could that be perceived as advertising to them? And how would we ensure that these guardrails are in place so that it wasn't marketing, it was really we're going to patients because they have unique experiences that we want to learn about, and we want their feedback about potential options when it comes to developing new innovative treatments. Another big bucket, culture. And so, this spans so many different spheres, organizations, but a couple of these using a science-based approach. Certainly, drug development's an area where people are very used to having best practices and to having making sure that you're adhering to certain protocols and really following a science-based approach. And so, there has been a perception that patient engagement is sort of wishy-washy, that it's not scientific, it's anecdotal, and that information is interesting but maybe not reliable. So again, that was, and I think in many spheres continues to be a challenge. Financial risks. If you are going to do this right, it takes quite a bit of financial risk because of infrastructure building to change processes internally within the company, but also for patient groups who are going to be investing their time and potentially developing a strategic plan around patient engagement as a primary pillar and focus area as well. And then organizational culture, I think needs no explanation, but making sure that people understand what this is, why it's important, and how this might be different than what people are used to. But you need those internal champions within companies, within regulatory bodies, within HTAs, to recognize that patient engagement is important. Also, some of the challenges were around communication. Is it okay to communicate in this early stage information to patients? Is that a risk? Translation and patient acknowledgement, that is really about how is the information that patients provide actually being used? Does it guide decisions, and is that clear? And then finally, visibility. A new space. This isn't an area that everybody is going to be familiar with. Not everybody is going to be comfortable with. So keep in mind that those are themes that we were, talking about putting together. This was from 2015 that this happened. It is now 2022, and I am pleased to report that certainly haven't overcome all of these challenges, but that there's been a lot of movement made to address these barriers globally. And, I think normally I would use this slide where I would have a list of all different initiatives that have happened over this year, over these years, where we could see, regulatory guardrails. Well, we've got the FDA guidances, we've got the ICH harmonization work, we've got AMA is working on, their work as well. We're having this meeting, which is really exciting, and there's a lot of interest around. But I'm not going to show all of these individual activities because we just published a book that actually does a pretty nice job of laying out the landscape and linking people to different resources that are out there. And so I would encourage you, to take a look at those, but just some high level kind of things that have happened over the past couple of years. I think we've gotten a pretty good sense now of visibility, at least in certain spaces. We hear patient-focused drug development being used as a buzzword. So, we want meaningful patient engagement, but I think visibility has been improved. I think we've got some templates, we've got lots of case examples where patients have been involved in drug development. And many of those are detailed in this book and are linked from this book as well. But I would encourage you, if this is a new space to you, or if it's something that you've been working in, take a look at those case examples, because oftentimes they can be useful talking points for you if you are, whether you're working in a patient organization and want to give some examples of how this has been impactful, taking information from patients and using it to guide decision makings. There's some nice examples that can be talking points. But the other point that I wanted to cover from this book, and I think others throughout the conference will probably be touching back on this, and I think there's some copies probably that Lembit also brought. So thank you, Lembit. I'm sure you're out there. But I also wanted to highlight the guiding principles, which is the third chapter, because I think that this is really such an important chapter where it outlines challenges and best practices, rationale for including those, what are technical skills that are required for certain patient engagement activities or using the information, and then other skills, and then links to resources. So one example in here is a challenge that we've been talking about for a long time, and I think we've gotten pretty far along now, is how do we make sure that patients are compensated for the time that they're putting into patient engagement activities? This is not, they aren't getting paid all the time, or historically haven't been, despite spending a lot of time, and folks who were academics, people who are healthcare providers had their salary that, and we're benefiting because we're talking to patients and we're using the information, and it's part of our day jobs. But for patients who might have a completely separate day job and are just doing this as volunteer work, it's important for us to make sure that they're being reimbursed and that they also have their time acknowledged and compensated as well. And so there's been an effort to develop, fair market value calculator. What is fair market value for patient group compensation, for individual patient compensation? And so that's not something one organization can determine themselves. That's something that needs to be done probably on a national level, or potentially on a regional level. And so now there's a list of best practices around compensation. There's a fair market value calculator for the United States, and there's one also being developed in Europe. Then my understanding is there's interest in adapting that globally as well. So that's just an example of the type of initiative that is outlined in the third chapter, but many of the ones that address the barriers that I mentioned. I also wanted to provide a little bit more practical advice for patient groups in particular who might be interested in patient engagement and are just getting started and want to start creating some win-win opportunities for their community. And so here's some, some information from a workshop that was back in 2015. So I guess we're doing a lot from 2015 today. At least I'm going back to 2015. But these are some opportunities for patients, for patient groups. You have your patient members, and that's really an asset that can help you identify what are research questions and other topics that are important to them, potentially to help guide development of a registry or contribute to a registry. Data is so important, and it's an important opportunity to collect other types of data. And I'm sure you've heard about definitions of patient experience data already, but here's some examples in the infographic there of the types of things that might be considered patient experience data. But then I also wanted to highlight, one really important thing, and this is great that it's being hosted by Duke-NUS, is that this needs to be done in a way that's really high quality, and that you're producing data that can be replicated and also ideally can be published. And so connecting with researchers is a great opportunity to work with them to help you collect these data. And you know, one tip I think can be connecting with early career researchers, or even people who are doing a PhD who might be looking for a specific topic. If you can get them interested in your particular disease, sometimes that could be a pretty inexpensive way to get a lot of really high quality work done. So, you know, just one potential consideration. Also wanted to highlight a tangible resource that's out there for people who are interested in mapping patient experiences. You know, thinking about quality, also consistency, I think is really important when it comes to data collection. And so one resource that we developed at the National Health Council was the Patient Experience Mapping Toolbox. And so that's a resource that's intended to make it really easy for patient groups and researchers from across different disciplines to comprehensively and consistently across different diseases do, you know, what market researchers often call patient journey mapping. When we talk to patients, they want it to be called patient experience mapping because patient journey seems like something that they might have self-selected to participate in. But, you know, this is really intended to be a research project. This isn't supposed to be something where it's just, you know, a brief conversation and then you learn something, but this can be part of a research project. We've heard it used for anecdotes as well, which is obviously a different use as well. But essentially what it includes is an interview guide template that has, I think it's basically 30 pages covering all different potential questions you might want to ask patients about their experiences before getting a diagnosis with a chronic disease, experiences in the health system and outside the health system while they were getting a diagnosis with a chronic disease, and then ultimately experiences living with and treating a chronic disease. And so the intent isn't that you interview people with every single question. The intent is that you download the Word document and figure out what makes sense in your particular context and given your research objective. But there's also, you know, tools here, the coordinator guide, the training guide, to help you understand how to use it. And then there's also a consent sheet template, and then a visual, which is the conceptual model of patients' experiences across those different phases, which you can use during the interviews. But anyways, that's a resource that's out there. It's free. You can take a look at it. You can use it. And the intent is really to make it easier for people to do high quality data collection, also in qualitative research. And then I finally wanted to just highlight that another opportunity is, which you may also have already heard about, is FDA has been doing these patient-focused drug development meetings. They were originally hosting them and then developed a process for externally led patient-focused drug development meetings. And I'm not suggesting that it's appropriate for every group to be doing, you know, some type of big formal meeting where you are, where you're gathering a large community around these, you know, this particular topic. But they list out some questions that have been used consistently across different chronic diseases. And they're really questions that matter broadly across, you know, different decisions that are being made. And they would be the types of things that are really helpful for you as a patient group to be able to provide to researchers, to especially if you're, you know, interested in spurring additional work in your area. Sometimes it can be helpful to have this information about health effects and daily impacts that matter most to patients, as well as perspectives on current approaches to treatment. So I encourage you just to take a look at those, thinking through. These are some questions that have been used across many diseases at this point, and I think are a good starting point if you're considering doing some data collection as well. And these are also included in the patient experience mapping guide as well. And that's it for me. So looking forward to the discussion, but feel free to email me if you have any specific questions about anything I presented. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think what really caught my attention is Elizabeth's slides on lessons learned and regulatory legal uncertainty, culture, communication. I think it's a problem that we're still facing here, and I think it's good that she's brought up these issues. I think it goes into the next session as well, and I think what's good is the flow is there. Now, I'm going to introduce a good friend of mine, Professor Tarun Veeramantri. He's President, Public Health Association of Australia, Governing Council, World Federation of Public Health Associations, School of Population and Global Health, University of Western Australia. Prof. Tarun is the President of Public Health Association, a member of the Governing Council. He was the Chief Health Officer in Western Australia from 2008 to 2019, and previously in the Northern Territory from 2004 to 2007. Without making him wait, Prof. Tarun, are you here?
Hi, Raj. Nice to be with you.
Good morning.
I'll just start sharing my screen. Sorry, that's not coming up. Okay, what I'm going to do then is I'll share my slides with you later, Raj, and I'll just talk to the basic points I'd like to make and hopefully leave some time for discussion as well at the end. So what I'm going to try and do is make the links between clinical care and public health and see what the difference is between those two things and what the implications might be for patient engagement. I'd like to first, though, say that I'm joining you from the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people here in Perth, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and acknowledge that this has been traditional land for many generations. This is a formal acknowledgement of country, that's what it's called, and it's a very important part of who we are in Australia that we do this. And there has a number of elements to it. The first element and the overarching is respect. And then there are three parts of that, I think, which are important. The first of all is, obviously, there's a historical element to recognize that we are a country that's has a history that's longer than a couple of hundred years. There's an important cultural element, and then there's an important specific about where we exactly are, the sense of place. And there were over 500 Aboriginal nations in Australia at the time of European arrival. These same three components, though, can be brought into the patient as they walk into the consulting room. And when you think about it, the overall clinical interaction is one of respect. And one takes a history, and people are incredibly willing to share their personal lives with you in a clinical encounter, even though they may never have met the person before. So there's a specific aspect of history building. It's important what happened in the past. There's a particular recognition of culture. Oh, thank you. There's a particular recognition of culture, which is not just a kind of a big view of culture, but also the specific cultural perspective that person has with their family and community. And then there's a very, very specific sense of place in terms of the setting of the clinical practice matters. Obviously, which country you're in, urban or rural, are you in a primary care clinic or in a hospital, is it private or public? So these three elements actually apply as well to the clinical encounter. And then there's also a very important sense of relationship and connection between the caregiver and the patient, which is very fundamental to continuous care as opposed to just episodic care. So having acknowledged there's a difference between public health and clinical practice, I want to say much good public health occurs in and is dependent on clinical practice. However, there are differences. If we could go to the next slide, thank you. If we could just move the slide, thank you. So it's tempting to think that clinical practice is about the patient in front of you, the single patient, and then public health is about multiple patients. That's not quite it, actually. It's not about many individual patients. It's about the patients you don't see, the population from which that person comes from. It's the difference, if you like, between a number and a rate. So a number is, I saw 5 people, all of whom had diabetes, and a rate is those 5 people came from a total population of 100,000, whatever it is. So it's the rate, it's the number at the bottom that counts. The unseen others, the people who didn't make it to the consulting room, that is the difference between a public health perspective and a clinical perspective. Now that perspective can be inferred or implied, but you have to be able to produce it when asked. For example, if you're sitting in a hospital, you might be seeing everyone in your region who has a particular condition, so it's in your head what that population is. If we could go to the next slide, please. Briefly, 3 key examples relevant to patient engagement. The first I became aware of 25 years ago when working on chronic disease, which has a lot of overlap with patient engagement, which is chronic disease self-management. And there was a body of work produced by Kate Lorig and others from Stanford, which was then replicated, which really showed the importance of peer-led chronic disease self-management courses to improve people's quality of life. This was robust data 25 years ago. However, we haven't seen that shift and greater pickup of these courses when I looked at the evidence recently. Why is that? And I think it's partly because in those courses, it's the patient as an expert, not just the patient as a partner. And when Elizabeth was talking about her definition of patient expertise, she talked about experience, patient engagement. She talked about experience, value, and expertise. But there's a difference between recognizing their expertise and treating people as experts, and therefore the payment example was very pertinent. We can think as well about other examples. If you think about diabetes management, it's very well structured generally between clinical care and public health. There are national diabetes strategies, funding, etc. We understand how that works. But it's clear that there's a before and after of consultation, meaning after the patient leaves, they need a whole series of follow-ups which have to be organized. And if you think about cervical screening, which is a population health program, we've been running them for 30 years or more. But the key point is, how do you get people in to your clinic to get screened? And there are still major barriers to accessing services, and which we're still battling with 30 years later. So there's an important component of the people who never get to your consulting room to get their cervical screen. And then they've also got to be followed up. So there's a major public health thinking is about thinking what happens before and after the consultation. And also clearly beyond the walls of the consulting room, who are you going to refer to? Is that done systematically? Are there different models of care using different providers, often nurse practitioners or the like? But the teams who are put together should include patients as experts. And these are really the micro parts of the bigger question around access and equity. And if we go to the final slide, please. Most public health problems, you start with the big picture and you're struggling to get the ground game. But with patient engagement, I think the ground game is good. The problem is lifting it up and having all of these other elements of a public health strategy. And that's why we've seen relatively little progress, I believe, in this whole field for the last 20 years. What would tell you that you've got a proper organised public health strategy? If you had some funding, if you had policy and regulation at a higher level, if you have data on population and outcomes, which takes effort and resources, looking at those quality of life and other indicators. You need visible leadership, and someone like Carmen Chita has provided this in spades. But you also need governance, structured, proper governance, and that's often lacking in terms of patient engagement. You need people to be included, they need to have a voice, and patient organisations need to have some power. So from a public health point of view, these are some clues about how to move away from this ad hoc approach to an organised approach, which is the key of public health, from episodic to sustained approaches, and from these single interventions or program to a comprehensive approach which requires multiple elements, all operating at the same time at different levels. Thank you, Raj.
Thank you, Tarun. I'm going to call on all three of them. Thank you, Dr. Padilla, giving us a unified voice from physicians, patient research from Elizabeth, as well as Prof. Tarun. I don't see them, actually. Hi, welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. So now, I think we've heard the perspective from Dr. Padilla, Tarun, as well as Elizabeth, but we've not heard the industry perspective. And amongst us today, we actually have many industry experts here. I think I'm going to just take a key point from what Tarun has mentioned earlier, and I think it sums our work all up very well, where I think he mentioned that the public health lens, and the thing is, patient engagement needs top-down as well as ground-up elements. So can I just call on a couple of industry experts here? Can I have Mr. Nichiran from Malaysia, from BI? Can you tell us about how ground-up initiatives will actually help patient engagement in this region? I mean, with your experience.
Thank you, Raj. I think you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I think ground-out approach is very important. What we're experiencing at a local level or even a regional level is that there's a trickle-down approach, whereby in the West, so the more developed organizations, they realize that patient engagement is required. But at our level over here, it's not really recognized that there's some sort of uncertainty. I think Elizabeth also mentioned patient evidence data. It's quite wishy-washy. That's that term that she used. So henceforth, I think how industries can come in is that we can support, we can form, or we can help support from patient organization from bottom up. Help train them to be part of researchers, like what Elizabeth said as well, and then it can be part of future trials, regulatory approvals, and also market access reimbursement. Yeah. So that's how.
Thank you. Thank you, Nichiran. I'm just going to move the same question to Lai from Roche. And, you know, so with all of this, do you think the region is ready? I think we've discussed many components yesterday into today. What does Singapore need? What does neighboring countries need? How do you think we can progress? I think we need to find solutions as well. And, you know, I think your name card stated that you're a healthcare system partner. So I'm quite sure you have some answers for us.
All right, I'll keep to one key point. And I think within this room and to those who are dialing in, we're almost sort of the converted, right? We believe in that coalition. We believe in finding the ways to, where our spheres overlap so that we can come together. But outside of this cohort and outside of this grouping, I think within Singapore, within the region as well, that sense of coming together to, well, there will always be a little bit of tension between the different industries, industry, government, and people. That tension is necessary, and that can be embraced and harnessed. And so how do we come together across these kind of sectors so that we can actually do more for patients and patients group, rather than to cut it out? I think what hit me very hard, or it's a simple statement, but resonated very well with me. And it went on last evening and in my head as well, as then we may have a role in government or a role in industry, but we are also first and foremost patients and caregivers as well at some point in our lives. Yeah.
Thank you, Lai. So I think that leads very well into a question for Dr. Padilla, and I think we've got a question in to say, very inspiring, Dr. Padilla. We know that for a long time, and the real question is, how do you get funding for these patient engagement events in media production? Who supports your work?
$1 million question. We do a lot of fundraising from friends and advocates, and the government actually partly sponsors some of our events. So we've got academe, we've got the private sector, and the patients and their friends.
Oh.
But for treatment, it's a combination of compassionate use, the government, and fundraising from our events.
Thank you. There's another question from for Prof. Tarun. Could you share an example of how Australia has developed sustained approaches to make patient engagement part of the system?
Thank you. So I looked at a recent international review of chronic disease self-management programs across the world, and 4 of the 8 examples were actually all from Australia. They were different states. So we did something a long time ago which raised the profile of chronic disease self-management in this country. And so our programs are now being run. But I was struck by how few other countries, despite the very strong evidence base, have formally incorporated chronic disease self-management in their policies. So the literature reviewers couldn't find evidence, even though there might be individual programs being run. I'll just give one other example about the shift that's necessary. One of the difficulties of chronic disease self-management is it relies on patients being the instructors and running the programs themselves with other patients. That's actually a big challenge to the health profession. And I think that's one of the reasons why it hasn't taken off, because it requires trust in patients and a giving up of control. And what you see is allied health professionals and others saying, we want to run these programs and we'll involve the patients as well, because we couldn't possibly trust patients to give the right advice about diet or whatever. You see, so there's a fundamental issue here where you say you want to start with chronic disease self-management and trust patients, but you quickly move back into an expert model. And I see that shift all the time.
Thank you, Prof. Tarun. I've got one last question because the bell is ringing silently beside me. Elizabeth and Prof. Dr. Padilla, we've spoken so much about HTA in the last, yesterday actually, and I think that conversation keeps going on. And I think being a devil's advocate, playing that part of the patient, do we have a defined system? Is there a format that's been structured? As a physician, Dr. Padilla, do you think that there is a standard format? I heard you in your speech earlier, but I just want to bring that out again because I think the conversations need to take a step towards solutions. Yeah.
There is no standard format. Every country is different. The needs are different. The demands are different. So I think we have to learn from each other and just speak up. Pick up what can be applied to our setting.
Yeah. So what are we training? I've seen that over the course of months, patient groups go for HTA training. So what are they training the patient group about?
In the Philippines, you have to train them to be very good advocates. Right now, they're the ones advocating for me. So communication actually is very important. Instead of myself telling the people, then I bring them along and they give the speeches now. So I think that's a big role of the advocates. It's not just being part of research, but being the spokespersons of the advocacy at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Padilla. Elizabeth?
Sure. I think that there's a lot. I completely agree with the statement. We can learn a lot from each other. There's so many different systems around the world, and there's pieces we might like from one, and then we might like something better from a different one. And so to be able to take those and And you know, we developed in the US context a classroom, an online classroom with some infographics and trainings and modules and things like that for around HTA, also around real world evidence, which you're going to hear, I know, a little bit more about later. How can patients be involved in that and in developing real world evidence? But I think it's really important to provide those resources so that people show up and know how to participate and feel confident with some of the terminology that's being used. And, you know, at the end of the day, people are there for different reasons. It's patient advocates who are professional patient advocates and might work for a disease organization. You're there probably to speak on behalf of your entire community and to provide, you know, to provide data that's representative of your community. And so you need training to make sure that you're prepared to do that. If you're an individual patient who's there to give a testimony or something like that, it can be really helpful to have some training about how to deliver that, not what to say because that's your experience, but just how can I say this in 5 minutes that I'm going to be allotted to be able to have an impact. You know, so that kind of training I think could be helpful for a whole range of uses as well. But you know, those are some kind of themes I would say with when it comes to training. Is the idea, you know, is to have impact, and it's always good to be prepared for the conversations, especially if you're tasked with potentially being 1 or 2 people who are representing your entire disease in the room of you know, people who are traditionally thought of as experts, academics, you know, physicians, health economists, all of these different folks who are engaged in HTA or whatever kind of decisions being made.
Thank you, Elizabeth. In the interest of time, we will have to continue our conversation next week. So thank you, Elizabeth from Spain, Dr. Padilla from Manila, and Prof. Tarun from Perth. Thank you for joining us.
Really, I would like to begin by thanking all of you, both those who participated in person and virtually. I would especially like to thank the moderators, the speakers, the panelists, because you've just so enriched our whole time together. And as we were saying earlier, I think our expectations have been exceeded simply by your presence and the genuineness of everything you've shared, as well as the depth of your experience and also your visions for the future. And of course, we hope to see that becoming a common vision. I would again like to thank John Skerritt and Lembit Rago for your leadership of the scientific conference and all the members of the scientific committee. Thank you so much for all your hard work in planning the scope of this conference, identifying the speakers and panelists to invite. And of course, it's wonderful that many people could actually come in person in spite of the concerns still about COVID and whether it's safe to travel. But thank you for being brave enough to come. And thank you for just being here together. And I must give a special shout out because Lembit keeps talking about the Secretariat. And they comprise my colleagues from CoRE, too many to mention, in fact. Of course, some have really been at the forefront of leading things in putting the conference together. But of course, everyone in the Center of Regulatory Excellence has pitched in to make sure this conference has gone off the ground, that you've been accommodated properly for those of you who've come, and that you've been able to be fed well and also move from one place to another. So thank you so much to my CoRE colleagues. I never actually can say thank you enough because each time we have an event, they always rise far above expectations. So if you could join me in just thanking them, both those who you've seen, those who've been up in behind the scenes managing the technical aspects, thank you so much. In closing, I'd just like to just make this comment. At the end of the first plenary, I said at the just at that end of that session, I said I felt inspired. But in the course of the sessions that followed, including today, I realized there's several steps beyond that. So beyond inspiration, there is aspiration, and we've heard a lot of that and talked about that, and it's still a journey ahead in terms of what we aspire to in terms of accelerating, advancing patient engagement across the region. But in fact, as we have been discussing at this panel, there's another step that comes beyond that. That's the perspiration level, right? We need to really start working on these things in whatever form that we can use this document for, so that it's beyond the talk and you will see things happening. But there are actually two more levels beyond that, and we haven't quite got there yet. Beyond perspiration, there's lubrication. We've actually got to make sure that the systems are being smoothened out. We're pouring oil where we can to make things work together. And it then reaches, I think, where we finally want to go. In tongue-in-cheek, I was thinking I should say levitation, but that's just, floating in the air. What we actually want to get to is a really practical aspect of respiration, where we are really breathing and living patient engagement, and it becomes as natural as breathing in and out. And we haven't quite got there yet. It's a journey down the road. There will be very many levels to it. But I think that's really what we're trying to get to, so that we're really breathing and living patient engagement in a practical way. So with those 5 words, inspiration, aspiration, perspiration, lubrication, and respiration, I wish you safe journeys home. Thank you very much for being here, and we look forward to continued engagement, not just patient engagement, but amongst all the stakeholders as well. Thank you so much.